Retro.
Hi, this is Vanessa Marshall, voice of Hera and Rook Cast, and you're listening to Dennis and Jay on Podcast Stardust. Their behavior is continually unexpected.
Welcome to Podcast Stardust. This is the fully armed and operational podcast dedicated to Star Wars news, reviews, and discussion. I'm Dennis Keithley.
And I'm Jay Krebs.
And this is it. It's the penultimate week of Maul Shadowlord. We're talking about episodes 7 and 8 before this all wraps up next week. But before we get into that, Jay, you want to remind everybody where we can be found on social media?
Absolutely, Dennis. We are on Facebook and Instagram conveniently at Podcast Stardust.
All right. The dish is aligned. The signal's boosted to maximum output. The shield is down. We are now broadcasting to the galaxy. So this will be our discussion of Maul Shadowlord, episodes 7 and 8, which are called Call to Oblivion and The Creeping Fear, respectively. So, as we've been doing, before we get into the full spoiler details of all of this, Jay, what are your non-spoiler or reactions to all of this?
Well, first of all, the word that comes to mind is wow. I mean, these two episodes really are just exactly not only the kind of storytelling that I love to sink into, but just everything about these episodes were fantastic. I mean, you've got those big flashy Star Wars moments that absolutely deliver, and just the art style and all of the little attention to detail that they gave into all the scenes was just amazing. But what really puts this one above all of the other episodes so far, and they've all been amazing, is just the psychological warfare that's going on underneath, the tension that's running through every single relationship. And we've been focusing on a lot of these relationships as we've been going through. And, what are some of the underlying things going on, and how does this tie to this, and what are the implications of that? But I mean, you just feel everybody being pressed in from all sides, and you just feel, especially with Maul, his internal unraveling, just as much as there's all of this external chaos. So, and like I said, just the art style, just so amazing. I just love it so much. The music, so cool, especially in one scene particular that diverts from the norm, which we will talk about. But the pacing, oh my gosh, it gave things, I don't even know how to explain it. It's like it gave things room to breathe in a way, but yet still built momentum for these last two episodes. So I can't say enough about it. But yeah, I've been rambling. So obviously I can't say enough, but I will stop now. What were your thoughts, Dennis?
Well, reacting to what you said about the art, it's something that I've been struggling to put into words all these weeks. We're now 4 weeks into all this, and the characters look fantastic. The backgrounds are much more ambiguous, for lack of a better description. Watercolors, the way they've been described, hazy and like that. But I think this aesthetic really works. And here's the thing: it's like while the animation or the character design, I should say, and the backgrounds may not be as crisp as what we just saw in the Bad Batch, which was really the last significant series. I'm not including Trials of the Jedi, the Empire, yada, yada, yada. The animation, not the art style, is the most realistic thing that's shown up so far in Star Wars. They just, the way the characters move, every reaction, the way the faces move when they're talking, the level of expression that they've been able to achieve is just next level, and it just really continues to impress. I've been taking to describe it as human. It's the most human it's ever been on there, which avoids the uncanny valley that people often complain about sometimes when you get into comics or Star animation sometimes, and when everything it's just a little too close, but it's just that one bit off. So frequently in animation, you need to make it a certain degree off that doesn't make people uncomfortable. And this definitely achieves that. And so that's all been fantastic. And these two episodes really have made me sit back and reevaluate what I think of Maul as a character in a good way. And I'm not certain I've come up with all my conclusions. I think our conversation tonight is going to help with that to a degree, but I have a lot of thoughts on Maul now and things I thought I never would have said about this character that I'm going to be talking to you about here this evening. So, it is just a fantastic, fantastic series. I've watched these 2 episodes 3 times. I watched them on Monday night when they came out. My youngest Alec was not able to join us because he had too much to do for school the next day. I watched them on Tuesday when I wrote the notes, and then I watched them with Alec on Wednesday because he hadn't seen them yet while we were doing our family pizza night. And when it was all over, he turned to me and said, "Legendary." That was just his one-word description of this, and I thought that was right on. I thought that was exactly right on. And I don't want to dip into hyperbole, and I don't want this to come off hot take, but I find on a week in, week out basis, this is the best thing Star Wars has put out in years. And look, I'm including season 2 of Andor. I'm including, I'm not sure if it's necessarily better than the first season or 2 of Mandalorian, but it's right up there. And it's just as much as I love the Bad Batch, I think this has been consistently episode in, episode out better than that.
I mean, there's a reason why it's rated so high. So that's, par for the course, I guess.
It's got 40, and we'll be talking about this again on Monday on the news, but it's got 40 reviews on Rotten Tomatoes. It's got 98% positive rating amongst critics, 39 for and 1 against. So, I mean, it's, And the audience score is actually a little bit lower, 90, which kind of surprised me, but I have a suspicion that there's just a certain contingent out there that doesn't matter what Star Wars will do. If George Lucas is not at the helm, they're not going to like it. But But hey, if you got a legitimate complaint, that's your prerogative. So if anyone's listening to this, they don't like it, send us an email and tell us why. I'd love to hear at the end, and we'll get you that information here in a bit. Okay, so that is our non-spoiler take on these 2 episodes, and I am sure we're going to gush more as we talk about these. But let's get into it. So up first, we're going to discuss episode 7, which is Call to Oblivion. I'm sorry, chapter 7, as they like to say. Do you want to go ahead and give us the summary for this one?
Yeah, I would love to. Maul leads Devon and Riley to his camp with a promise to get them off Janix. An Imperial probe droid locates the camp, and stormtroopers quickly swarm Maul and his allies. Another Inquisitor, the 11th Brother, arrives to assist Marok in his hunt for Maul and the Jedi. Riley is captured by the stormtroopers, and Devon is separated from Maul after rushing to his side against the Empire. Once she reunites with Daki and Lawson, they begin working on a plan to rescue Riley. Meanwhile, Maul takes on the Inquisitors, and the episode ends with him bringing down a cave on them after he was cornered.
Yeah. So those are our broad strokes on this one here. Real quick on this. The big addition to the series this episode was the introduction of the 11th Brother, which we know as the Crow. And of course, this is also the Inquisitor that we see Ahsoka defeat at the end of Tales of the Jedi. Do you think this is the person Marok was talking to? I don't think so. I don't think this was intended to be the reveal from the previous episode. Because when Marok has that whole image, and we only get like a bare glimpse of the character in the foreground. Because I don't think he'd be, the first, Marok is the first brother. I don't think he'd be addressing the Crow as my lord.
Right. Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say. I mean, if anything else, he would address him as brother. And because the Crow or the 11th Brother is after the first brother. So if anything else, you would think it would be reversed, that the 11th Brother, having come after him, obviously, would kind of bow to the Marok, the first brother, as we found out.
Here's another question. Not that we have any real reason to know, but what Jedi do you think Marok and the Crow are?
That's a loaded question, because I've actually been thinking about this quite a lot. And, as we know, when Ahsoka defeats, is it Marok? No, it's a different Inquisitor in the Ahsoka series.
No, it's Marok.
Is it Marok? Okay.
Yeah.
We see that green mist.
Same with the
that
Crow.
Comes out of him. Yeah. And so, that's Night Brother stuff. And that is, the same kind of magic that Mother Talzin used. So bear with me here. I don't know if they are Jedi.
They
This is
are,
a
and I'll tell you
really
how I
smart
know.
take. Okay. How do you know?
The the guides on StarWars.com say so.
Okay, okay. See, that's why I need to get into reading those more, and that's
Yeah.
one thing that I've not been very good about. So that blows my theory
But
completely
that
out of the water.
but that raises more questions, right?
It
If
does,
they if they are Jedi, why are they dissolving in mist when they get
right?
defeated like that?
Yeah,
So what
yeah,
dark force power is happening here? So
exactly. Because that is
yeah.
definitely not well, obviously they've been changed to the dark side
Mhm.
by their inquisitorious basically torture and reprogramming. So, I don't know, but that doesn't make any sense that that would just happen that way, If anything, that is still indicative of the magics that we've seen through Mother Talzin. So, yeah, there's a lot of question marks out there,
Yeah,
for
and
sure.
another thing though is like if you think about when Savage Press gets defeated or killed by Sidious in the Clone Wars, which is very relevant to these 2 episodes,
Mhm.
he just does not explode into green vapor, right?
Mhm.
He kind of shrivels up and the Night Sister magic comes out of him and it kind of gets absorbed by Maul in a way. It's
Mhm.
not the same stuff. It's like
Mhm.
this green glowing power type of a thing, and it almost looks like smog when the Inquisitors die.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
I
Yeah, you're right.
there's some sort of a difference, and I'm not sure it was. I'm looking forward to getting the answer someday from Dave Filoni. I hope at a convention some point time someone asks him and pins him down so he cannot be so evasive. Like, that's really interesting. What do you think? Thing that he does. But
Nice impersonation, I like that. But
yeah,
one
that's
thing
not
I
the only
do
one I
know
can do.
for sure no, you are good at impersonations. But, one thing I do know for sure is he is extremely tall,
Yeah.
because there's that one when he's getting into the interrogation room to talk to Riley, he has to duck to get
Hmm.
through that door. So he is very formidable, in height, if you will.
I think we need Delilah S. Dawson to write a story about these guys for us. So
Oh, yeah. Oh, yes, please. Yes, please.
okay. So getting into some other details here, and feel free to bring up any questions that you have as we go through this. But I'm wondering a bit about Devon here because a couple things stood out to me. What is it with the way that she treats Riley? It's so inconsistent. They are following Maul through the tunnels, and Riley's like, "What are we doing? Why are we following this guy?" And then and this part I don't have any objection to. She's like, "That Inquisitor is after us, and he's not going to stop until we're dead. So this is the better course of action." But then I thought she was a bit condescending when she's talking to Maul's like, "We have to get this boy," and Riley's
Mhm.
like, "Boy," it's like it seemed pretty disrespectful to me. But and then later, and I'm kind of dipping into the next episode here. She's also like, "Hey, sorry I couldn't protect you." And and then and this gets into the interrogation thing, which we'll talk, which again is in the next episode. But it's just there seems to be a bit of a superiority type of a complex that she has based on the fact that she's in the Jedi Order, or she was in the Jedi Order, and he's not there. But am I making a mountain of a molehill, or what do you think?
No, I don't think at all, and there's a few things about Riley that I think are, if you really pay attention to what's going on, or not Riley, Devon, sorry. If you really pay attention to what's going on with her, are very nuanced changes.
Hmm.
And I think one of the things that you pointed out with her calling Riley boy, first of all, goes back to when Docky and Lawson were wanting to talk about what was going on, and we, told the kids like, "Okay, let's let the adults talk," kind of thing.
Hmm.
So in a way, maybe asserting the fact that she is above that with Riley, as far as how her station is in this whole scheme of things with her abilities and her power and so on and so forth. But then part of me almost wonders too, there's a few other things that she does that is almost, I don't want to say Sith like, but I guess it's more Sith adjacent, I guess you could say, in some
Hmm.
of her actions. And so, by calling him boy, there could be some emotional distancing there, like for her to pull away from being, even remotely friends with him. And just the way that she kind of aligned herself with Maul when she fought next to him, and she chose to fight next to him as opposed to truly protect Riley in that way, which I think she thought she was being protective, but she's really starting to adopt these survival behaviors, I think, even without realizing it. And she's edging towards survival over everything else. And she's attracted to Maul's power, obviously, because we talked about how she even said to Daki, it's a waste of our abilities if we're just
Right.
hiding out. So I think there's just little things that are kind of, but then she pulls back because, like you said, she apologizes to Riley, like, I'm sorry I couldn't protect you.
Yeah, but even then, it's kind of a, you know, look, there's a difference, and again, it's hard to talk about this episode without leaning into the next episode too. But at this one point when Lawson's losing it, that Riley's been captured, and in this, and Daki says, my friend, we can't live in this world of regrets. Daki treats Lawson as an equal here. I don't think Devon ever treats Riley as an equal in this. And I think that's problematic because it's like, this boy, okay, sure, possibly she's trying to withdraw from any potential type of attachment, stuff like that. But to your point about, like, she's attracted to Maul's power, she's by calling Riley that and speaking to Maul about Riley that way, I think she's in an unspoken way saying, you and I are on this one level, he's beneath us there.
Yes.
And I think that's definitely I think that's part of it here. And then later in this episode, they get to the camp, and Riley, and Devon decide to leave because Maul wants to take off in the ship. And Devon says, no, I'm not leaving without my master. And that's final. And then they try to sneak away. And then Maul jumps down that platform before them. And basically he says something to line to us like, I am willing to train you and give you the power you need to defeat your enemies. But, and then he like snaps, it's like, this vacillation, it's, he basically can't put up with that anymore. It's, you're either going in on this or not in this situation. And then even in that moment, that's right before the Empire shows up. All the stormtroopers start swarming everything. And it's a little even further before when the Inquisitors show up. Riley's over there on the side, and I'm getting more into Devon's behavior here because there's a bigger issue. But Riley's trying to encourage us, like, hey, now's our chance. Let's go. Let's leave Maul and his friends to the Empire. And she looks at him, and then she looks back, and she dives into that fight. Well, why? Why does she do it? I mean,
exactly.
And to me, this screams of her desire for revenge, which is incredibly un-Jedi-like in this situation. But what's your take on that part of it?
Well, and you can tell that she's torn, and that's what I was saying about, she's definitely attracted to Maul's power, and she wants more of a respect of her abilities. And I think that part of that too, you can even hear her, she just lets out this guttural, like, "Rah!" when she goes to do all of this kind of thing. It reminded me very much of Rey, very feral, very, very primal kind of thing. And I think she's kind of torn, and like I said, she's adopting some of these actions almost unknowingly because she is, I guess you could say, being seduced by the dark side, if you will. And but I do think that she's really at a point where she wants to be accepted, not accepted so much as verified, I guess, in how she feels. Validated is the word that I'm looking for, and what she can do. But she keeps poking Maul. I mean, she's poking the bear in a lot of ways, not just in the, like you said, stop vacillating, kind of thing. It's not just that, going back and forth, but she pokes him about his background too.
Well, did you also know she lit her lightsaber first when Maul confronted them?
Oh, no, I did not.
Yeah, and then Maul ignites his to fend off that blow. So, there's a lot about
That's
that.
true.
Remember in The Empire Strikes Back, Luke was counseled, that a Jedi uses the Force for defense, never for attack, and yet he was the first one to ignite his lightsaber when he confronted Vader. And then in Return of the Jedi, it was the opposite, right? It was
good point.
well, not really, because he picked up his lightsaber to strike down the Emperor, and Vader intercepted him. But it is a, in this situation, it's like there she was using it for attack, not for defense. We can get into semantics about that. She felt like she had to get away, and maybe that was a situation there. But and here's the other thing: is like later in this episode, and this is a very loaded question. Daki makes a suggestion after Devon is reunited with him and Lawson. They're in those tunnels. And Daki makes suggestions like, our presence is only making the situation worse. Perhaps if we extricated ourselves, the Empire would be more lenient on the Lawsons. And Devon's like, you're abandoning them. And, I'm going to go help them. And then Daki almost looks ashamed for a second here. But then is like, he nods and they go off all together on that. What do you make of that? I thought that was a really interesting scene.
Yeah, so I think that boils down to the generational difference between Daki and Devon. And we talked about this before, in terms of the things that they've been through and what they've seen and what has been expected of them throughout their term as Jedi. And so I think what Daki, he had the best of intentions when he was saying that, but Riley hit a nerve, or I keep calling her Riley. Devon hit a nerve with Daki because when she said, "Then we're just abandoning them," then Daki realized that maybe this is not the time for that. I had the best of intentions, but that's probably not the best idea at this point because the stakes are different, the situation is different. It's something that maybe he would have done pre-Order 66, but it's not going to fly now. Kind of thing. What do you think?
Well, I've got very mixed feelings on this because with the Clone Wars, as we've discussed in other episodes and other contexts, the Jedi lost as soon as they decided to lead the Republic armies. And I can't help but wonder if Daki is reflecting on this and thinking, our presence here is making things worse. So if we remove ourselves, and maybe it's something he's just wondering off the cuff. This is something that he's proposing on the fly. But Devon is like, but we can't abandon them here. Well, are either one of them stopping and listening to the will of the Force in this situation? I don't know.
Good point. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. And so it's hard to say. I think, I also wonder if there is an underlying bit here. And as we've acknowledged so many times before, attachment is a touchy subject. But,
yes.
Daki has talked about placing faith in his apprentice and listening to his Padawan. And, we're going to wait for my Padawan. My connection with my Padawan will reunite us and this, that, and the other. And I can't help but wonder at this point, he's really thinking of the best interests of himself and his Padawan, as opposed to what's actually best for Janix, what's best for the Lawsons, et cetera, in this situation. And on the flip side, I can't help but wonder if Devon is like, it's not so much that it's the right thing to do, stick with the Lawsons. It's that, I was supposed to protect that guy and I failed. Now I got to make amends. I got to I got to make up for this, which is, I think, which is also not exactly the light side type of looking at things. It's just another subset of revenge.
Yeah, that's a good way to look at it for sure. Those are some good points. Yeah, it's so hard because that particular whole scene right there, I mean, that speaks volumes, and there's so many different ways to interpret it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So, Riley, let's talk about him for a second here. I feel we're running out of time on this episode. There's going to be a lot of other questions, but there's just, these things are so packed.
They are.
What do you think he thinks of this entire situation now? Because when this series started, he's caught between his parents. He's got his mom, who has left Janix and is now in Imperial service. And you got his dad, who does not trust the Empire and has been probably subtly with him, but suggesting that if the Empire shows up, it's not going to be good for anybody. And then when the Empire did show up and things were not going well, Riley contacts his mom and she's like, just do what they say and everyone will be okay. They're there for your protection. Mm-hmm. But his entire experience since the entire Empire showing up has not been good.
Right. Right.
So, he's a teenager. If we can put yourself in his shoes, what do you think?
Well, he's definitely had his eyes opened, as you said, because
Mhm.
it is not what he had expected from what his mom was trying to, press upon him in terms of what he could expect. And it's really just a bad episode of Bring Your Son to Work Day, for Brandon,
Yeah.
because he's actually getting to see now, not only from his dad's perspective, as far as he's seeing, as we said last couple of episodes, that his dad has kind of a different life than what he does at home, and he has this past, and he has these experiences that he didn't even know about, kind of thing. And he did know a little bit about Rena Soul, but he didn't know the depth of it. And of course he still doesn't, but he knew of her. But yet there's so many things that and with Two Boots, that he's had his eyes open to. And I just think part of him is, I don't want to necessarily say that he's in shock, but this is just so different than what he ever expected it would be. It reminds me of, if you've ever seen the movie True Lies with Arnold Schwarzenegger and Jamie Lee Curtis. It's kind of
Love
like
that
what
movie.
Jamie Lee Oh, me too. Like what Jamie Lee Curtis experienced when she got to go with Arnold Schwarzenegger's, Harry, his character. And just a complete, this is what this is all about kind of thing. So I think his survival instincts will kick in, and they have to an extent, but I think he's just really out of his element. And I don't care how much he's heard on either side. I mean, when you're put in the middle of something like that, you do kind of go into like a oh my gosh mode, sort so to speak. And so I think that's kind of where he's at right now.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think this is a major eye opener for him, and I can't, I would do not envy the position he's in right now because, look, I'm fortunate. My parents has never divorced, and I've never been caught up between any differences of opinion to that magnitude. And so, and and I can't imagine like the average person who is the child of divorce have something so diametrically opposed between their parents. One who so fervently believes in what a big portion of the galaxy perceives as this authoritarian government versus, the father who's looking for independence, an independent way of life on his home planet and stuff like that. And, it's clearly come between the parents there. So that's just huge, huge, huge. And all this time, he's been trying to walk a tightrope between his parents. But what one parent has told him has been so far from the truth of his existence and his experience there. So
Mhm.
I
Mhm.
suspect it is a little bit of, I wonder if this is something we're going to see in season two come up. But
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Yeah,
well,
because I mean, it's definitely not, when his mom told him that it would be okay and just do what they say. I mean, obviously, that's not the case, because even when he does do what they say, they still rough handle him and they still treat him like dirt, essentially.
yeah.
And
Well, we
he's a
need to get
kid.
on the next. Yeah, we need to get on the next episode. But I don't want to end the discussion of this episode without talking about Maul's fight versus the Inquisitors.
Oh, yes.
Um, this was just next level stuff. What'd you think?
Oh yeah. I mean, just everything that they did in this episode with the visuals and the waterfall and the cave, and I mean there's so many different pieces of symbolism. We've talked at length before about the what water means as far as baptism and changing, and then caves in Star Wars. I mean, come on.
Mhm.
That's synonymous with a lot of different kinds of things. But I loved the fact that when Maul was fighting against them and they were going through those waterfalls, that they gave specific attention, and this isn't a storytelling thing, but the artwork, that even the blades sizzled and you saw
Yeah.
that little bit of steam that was coming off of them. But I mean, you talk about an epic battle between what Maul, and we've talked about this before, about what Maul could have been, not necessarily in a positive way, but what he could have been and where he is. And, you know, gosh, the way that he sees the Inquisitors, especially after episode 8, and I have a feeling that we're kind of on the same wavelength when it comes to his interpretation of who they are and what they're doing. But he kind of met his match in some ways. And obviously it was 2 against 1, but there were some things
And he
in this
was wounded.
battle.
Yeah.
Yes. And he was wounded, and when you're wounded and it's your own body, it's one thing and it's hard to maintain control, but when you've got a literal malfunction and then you're trying to control that, that is, yeah, it's amazing that he survived at all.
Right. So he had a number of disadvantages in this fight. And as you've pointed out, it was 2-on-1, the 2 Inquisitors. And I don't think individually either one of those stood a chance of beating Maul. 2, he had the existing problem with his knee after Daki had kicked him way back in the beginning of the season. And all they had repairs that never fully took, because even before the one Inquisitor lands the blow on his hip, that knee acted up a couple times.
Yep.
And 3, he seems genuinely concerned about his comrades in this situation, which, we're going to get into this whole vision thing in the next episode, and which it really impacts the way I see Maul. But just the way that he seemed to, because Scorn, one of the Night Brothers, gets killed in this battle. He jumps in to try and help out Maul right before one of the Inquisitors is going to deliver a fatal blow, and then gets run through from behind. And Maul was bugged by that. You could see from his reaction, and and it comes up with his own memories of Savage getting killed by Sidious later, and that's more of a next episode discussion here. So he had all these things working against him, and then of course the whole thing ends with, he kneels and he puts his saber on his belt and he holds up his hands, and then Maraka's approaching him. Is like, there's no surrender for you. The Emperor wants you dead. And then I love Maul's response that likewise, and then he brings the ceiling down on top of them. So yeah, I mean, it's I think it's important in a series like this. We all know Maul to be like one of the most powerful Force users in the galaxy, somewhere in a hierarchy after the Emperor and Darth Vader and, probably Obi-Wan. Well, definitely Obi-Wan, because Obi-Wan beat him. And then, others. But he still ranks really high up there. And these Inquisitors, they can't do everything he can do with a lightsaber. That's why they cheat mode on ability to make their saber spin the way that they do. I will always quote Filoni for saying that. But at any rate,
cheat mode.
But it's important to have Maul have vulnerabilities and to not always have the upper hand, because then it's not much of a story, right? So,
right. Yes.
And then this really sets up super significant stuff that happens in episode 8. And there's a few things that are left over from this episode that I'm sure we'll get into as we get into the discussion of episode 8. But let's go ahead and go there, because we're already well over halfway through this episode and we're running long. But
not surprising.
Yeah, you want to go ahead and give us the summary for episode 8, The Creeping Fear?
Yeah. Rook and the rest of Maul's remaining forces head to a new sector in the hopes that Maul will find them. Meanwhile, Lawson strikes a deal with Two Boots and agrees to turn himself in if Two Boots can rescue Riley. However, Two Boots soon learns the Empire was not what he thought and helps them all escape in a vehicle Devon acquired. Meanwhile, Maul experiences a vision of his past that studies his resolve to get vengeance on Darth Sidious. Once he reunites with Rook and the rest of the crew, he receives a message from Crimson Dawn that Dryden Boss wants a meeting.
Yeah, so that was quite the development there at the end. But I want to put that aside for the moment, because I want to make sure we have plenty of time to talk about this. But this vision / memory that Maul goes through while he's in the train tunnels trying to get back to his comrades. What do you make of all that? Because, wow, that was huge.
Yeah, it was very huge. And, and again, there's so much layering to this, and there's so much Star Wars mythos in this as well. But we've said time and time again that Maul is a product of his tragedies and the things that he's been through his entire life. From the fact that he was, basically he's psychologically imploding at this point. So he's dealing with abandonment issues from Sidious, identity loss, because when he was cut in half and then became Spider Maul and was all cray-cray on Lothal, And then his family lost his family. So he's lost Savage, he lost, Mother Talzin and the like. And then he's been dealing with this revenge thing too, with Kenobi and with Sidious. So, he's got all of this emotional baggage going on. And I think a lot of it is starting to really hit him and come back full circle because of a lot of the things that he had said, even to Riley in the last episode when or not, I keep calling her Riley, Devon, when she asks him about his master. And he said, I showed him loyalty, but was never rewarded, kind of thing. And so you know that there is that angst there. And then with the whole idea that he's going through this I think is where it comes back to, as we talked about way back before this series ever started, when the idea of Maul being relatable comes up. I think this is where it starts to happen.
Yeah.
In kind of a weird, twisted way. So you almost start to empathize with what Maul has been throughout these memories and things. And I have to say, this particular cave scene reminded me a lot of what Rey went through in The Last Jedi when
Oh,
she
okay.
was dealing with her mirror image. You remember that?
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah. So those are just my initial thoughts before we talk it through. But what about you?
Yeah, and when I say this really changes the way I've been thinking about Maul, because I labeled our news episode a few weeks back about he's so relatable, because that
Yes.
that quote from Filoni just struck me as like, is he? I mean, okay. This whole thing starts with him. He wakes up from being face down in the water after plummeting out of the cave and through a bridge. That little Sidious like saber move he did through the bridge was pretty cool.
Very much.
And he sees a vision of his younger self, and his initial reaction to that is, I hate you. And he swats at the water. And then he goes through this entire vision. And then he's looking at his reflection in the water again after he stumbles. And his younger self says to him, I'm sorry. And the reflection sheds a tear, and so does Maul. Did you
Yes.
ever think you would see Maul shed a tear?
No, never.
And he says, it's okay. It's okay. I'm not gonna let him do that to anyone ever again. Words to that effect. There. And as you made reference to, when Devon asked him about his master, that quote is something along the lines like, his betrayal was devastating, but it wasn't the deepest wound he could inflict upon me. And and then he goes through his history, when he was a teen, maybe, I'm not exactly sure how old he was, and Savage is pleading with him not to go, and Sidious drags him off, and then Sidious is trying to train him, and then he labels his efforts feeble, and then immediately uses Force Lightning on Maul. And then there's they actually used Ewan McGregor's voice. I looked this up, for that scene where Kenobi slices him in half, and then we see him as Spider Maul, and then Savage Opress, gets taken out by Sidious, and so all these things happen to him. And it's like he finally looked inside and examined what is been going on with him and why he wants revenge so bad. All that being said, it's just kind of like, it doesn't excuse everything he's done, and it's not going to excuse things that we see him do from here on out. But yeah, you're right. It does make him a bit more relatable here. In this notion that, okay, but what do you make of this notion? It's like, I'm not going to let him do this to anyone ever again. It's the, how to word this question so it does not come out so obvious, because there's an obvious answer, and I'm not sure and there's, I think, a less obvious answer to this. But why? What is it? Is it really that he cares about everybody else, or is there a betrayal element to this, or what about it is this with Maul? Because he goes on to do horrible things to people in trying to get back at Sidious, which, does that make him better than Sidious? I'm not sure.
Yeah, these are such, very loaded, very deep kinds of questions, because and I love the fact that we are trying to tear these layers apart and really kind of put things back together in terms of this particular character with Maul. And I think, as you pointed out, with him looking at his old self when it was kind of split, you could see half of his younger self and then half of him as he is now. And then he says, I won't ever let him do this to anyone ever again. I think back to the Clone Wars, and we were just talking about these episodes before Maul started. When you go back to that Zabrak village, those Night Brothers, even though their culture was one of, combat, and, they were battling each other and that type of thing, there was definitely a family loyalty there. I mean, just the fact that they call each other brothers
Mhm.
is, huge. I mean, that's a familial type of a title. And so I think for Maul, maybe he thought that he was going into doing something that was different from what he signed up for.
Sure.
And so then when he was so corrupted, and then he saw the consequences of his actions coming down on his other brothers, with Savage, and then, as you pointed out, that he just witnessed his other brother, being killed right in front of him, just in the same manner as his other brother, Savage was.
Mhm.
That is really hitting home for him. And I think him saying to himself, with his younger self saying, I'm sorry, and Maul saying, it's okay. That's the closest he's ever going to come to self-forgiveness. Does it make him a good person all of a sudden? No. But I
Yeah.
think it also makes him accept, this is who I am now. I can't change the past. This is what happened to me. I can either, revel in it and roll in and wallow in despair, or I can use it and I can move forward. And I think that it's at this point that he makes that decision.
Yeah. I can't help but think of Anakin here, and after he becomes Darth Vader, and we always get those quotes like, "You didn't kill Anakin Skywalker, Obi-Wan, I did." And frankly, when Maul in these scenes, he was talking to his reflection, it's okay. It's like he's not forgiving himself; he's forgiving his former self, because he starts this whole thing.
Right.
It's
Hmm.
bookended with him swiping his reflection, "I hate you," and then telling his reflection, "It's okay." It's like he's forgiving his past self
Hmm.
for falling for what Sidious said, and then saying, it's like it's not your fault. So it's a way forgiving himself, but he's still kind of detached, I think, from all of that part of it. And I think it's we need someone who knows more about psychology than we do here. Dave Motters, if you're out there, write in.
There
But
you go.
but this notion that it's like he hated his former self because it seems like he seemingly blames his younger self for getting him into this position, but then it's telling like after reliving all that, he's forgiving himself. It's like
Hmm.
it's okay, but still he's doing it from a detached type of a position. And this, there's some degree of detachment, it seems like, there. And so I don't know. The whole thing was just fascinating. And
Oh, yeah.
even after this, he other thing is I liked how he kept like banging on his hip the same way that Kylo Ren does in The Force Awakens after he takes that blow.
Oh,
Uh,
good point. Yeah.
yeah, just kind of like, like he's drawing strength from the pain
Mhm.
and the wound there, which will come into our Bane discussion in a couple of episodes. But anyway, the and then when he returns to his camp, he's carrying. I'm not saying he didn't have purpose before, but he's just carrying himself slightly different. It's this.
Mhm.
I've been through this. I've like faced some of the worst that the Empire can throw at me, and I survived. And now it's time to move on to the next plan. So
Yes. And that's what
yeah.
I was saying. He reached a point where he was able to let that past go, and
Mhm.
he kind of reconciled it and said, "All right, this is what I'm doing. I can't change that past, but I can use it to move forward." And it's interesting how you're talking about Vader slash Anakin, real quickly with that. I think that Anakin believed he deserved everything that he got,
Mhm.
and even when he talked to Obi-Wan, you didn't kill Anakin, I did. So
Mm.
he never got to that point of realization, I think, that Maul did. And
Yeah.
until, the very end of his life, and I don't think that he reached it in the same, type of way that Maul did. It was from a different perspective kind of
Yeah.
thing.
The other thing that this does is it makes the final time we ever see Maul chronologically when he's defeated by Obi-Wan and he asks Obi-Wan if he's protecting the Chosen One. And when Obi-Wan tells him he is, Maul says he will avenge us. And
Yes.
this makes
Oh,
that scene make so much more sense than it ever did before. I mean, I'm not saying it didn't make sense before, but it just adds so much gravitas to that scene. I mean, just does wonders for it.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, because now you understand where that comes from and where the impetus of that is because that statement that he says, I'll never let him do this to anyone else again. He will avenge us, or that's just like, oh my gosh, it gives you chills to think about how that comes full circle. And I'm so glad that you brought that up because that's something that I know that particular scene got a lot of, I don't want to say ridicule necessarily, but it's so unlike that character. And, that whole scene was questioned quite a bit. And now like, it just literally gives me chills just to think about what it means now knowing this.
Yeah. Well, at the risk of opening another conversation point that we really don't have time to discuss, and we'll say this in another episode, is that I wonder what happens between now and that part of Rebels that shifts Maul's focus from Sidious to Obi-Wan.
Yeah.
So that'll be something to keep an eye on going forward. Okay. Well, we got some other things I want to talk about in the last 15 minutes or so that we got, because this is already going long, but that's fine. There's so much good stuff to talk about here.
It is.
Rook cast. And it's a bit of a conversation that's left over from the last episode, and it's drifting into this one. She finally confronts Maul about his judgment when it comes to Devon. And it's kind of in light of the fact that some of the Mandalorians are letting their mercenary nature shine through. While she may be devoted to Maul, some of them are openly grumbling. And we saw this in last week's episodes. It's like, they want to take their money. She told them that's going to only slow them down, leave it. So they do. And then they run off and try to take the ship before Maul, Rook, and the rest of them get on the ship. And, they get their comeuppance as soon as they take off, the gunship show up and blow them up with missiles. But she flat out says, I'm beginning to think that this potential apprentice, she's not even calling Devon a potential apprentice. She's just saying the apprentice
is clouding his judgment.
On there. So, all that said, I don't think there's a crack in her loyalty there. But what's your take on all this?
Well, I have a feeling that something else is going to end up happening to Rook as well as the rest of the Mandalorians, because obviously by the time we get to Solo: A Star Wars Story, they're not around. So they're, at least not visibly in his criminal syndicate, unless Rook is so completely loyal to him that she's operating on such an underground level that you never hear of them, kind of thing.
Yeah.
So I think she wants to be loyal to him, and obviously she's instructing the other mercenaries to follow suit. But I do think that not necessarily that she's questioning Maul, just that she's a little bit apprehensive of some of his choices, because she's been with him long enough at this point to know that he is just wicked smart and that he goes beyond what intelligence level of anyone she's probably ever dealt with before. So I think that plays a big part of that. And the mercenaries, they're mercenaries, like as you pointed out, they're all in it for the credits. Which, quick aside, I do think it's kind of interesting that the one time we see another Mandalorian take his helmet off, other than Rook cast, he gets blown up.
Yeah, he does.
So it's like, well, that was short-lived kind of thing. So yeah, I mean, bottom line, to answer your question, I'm not really sure where Rook is at this point. Like I said, I don't think she's unloyal to him, but I do think that she is a little apprehensive at this point.
Yeah, well, I mean, after they have that conversation, she's the one insists that we're going to wait for him. We're going to wait for him. He'll find us. Right. We're going to wait for him. Sadly, there's been no thing, but we're going to move on to the next sector. He will find us, type of thing. So I don't question her loyalty. I think what is really being exhibited here is legitimate concern. She's put everything she has behind Maul. And she still calls him Lord. And I think she still thinks of him as the rightful ruler of Mandalore. In this sense, because I can't remember exactly what happened to the Darksaber after everything that happened, but he won it fair and square. And we know how Mandalorians revere that item. So
right.
There's that. Okay. Don't want to shortchange her, but we still got a couple other things that are really important to talk about. So Two Boots. Finally, finally gets over his dedication to protocol and does what's right by the Lawsons.
He
So
sure does.
yeah, what stood out to you about that?
Well, there's a few things. Obviously, Two Boots has such charisma and just fall in love with him. He's got definite K2SO energy throughout a lot of these particular scenes, and even down to acting like he's having Riley for interrogation, kind of thing. But I love the fact that he shows off his non-boots to
Yeah,
Riley, and it's almost like he has tan lines because you
yeah,
could see that his feet are a different color, up to where his boots were as opposed to the rest of it. But then he's finally starting to wake up in terms of the fact that I can do all this and try to be compliant to the Empire and try to follow all these protocols and do what I need to do. And it doesn't make a lick of difference. And
right.
so when it comes down to it, he's almost, in his little droid brain, he's got this split conscience of what am I going to do here versus what am I going to do here. And I think he really kind of has an epiphany and realizes that the right thing to do is to really help, the Lawsons and to get them the help that they need. Because if droids could feel regret, I think he's a little regretful at what he's done and he's trying to make amends at this point.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's hard to hold it against because it's his programming, right? Which tells them that we
Right.
have these protocols and, it's a binary thing. Is this what the protocol says? Yes, we do it. Is this what protocol says? No, then we shouldn't do that. And so when Brander Lawson makes that deal with him to turn over Riley, and then, as an aside, I love when they're going down the hall and he's like, shouldn't have been breaking the laws or walking past the other droids and stormtroopers. Like,
Yes.
and Riley's like, what are you doing? As I'm trying to, hey, you need to act on. It's like, I am, you're not. So it was a great little scene there. And then, as soon as they get out, Two Boots says, the deal's off because immediately they get overwhelmed by other stormtroopers and the like. And so, anyways, that was it was fun to finally see him come to on that after, he's been threatened with being with a mind wipe. He's talking about how everything returning to normal, and then that other officer says, like, you got a loose wire or what? Because
Mhm.
Kleiss, Commander or Kleiss is dead. She's not coming back. And
I guess that confirms things for us. It wasn't just a transfer. We kinda knew, but it kinda confirms it too.
yeah, I mean, still seems like an assumption on his part. But the point being is that Tubus has been operating slavishly to this notion that there are these protocols that are these imperial protocols and they will follow them. And that's not the case at all. The Empire does
Mhm.
what it wants. And so, in a way, his worldview gets shattered here. And so he's now
Oh,
picking up
yeah.
pieces and dealing with that. So,
And
and
he
then,
gets, threatened with a memory wipe by Blake too.
right.
So, I think that had a lot to do with his, turning to, saying, "Okay, I'm gonna help them. This is what's gonna happen."
Yeah. Absolutely loved the chase scene after Devon stole the speeder. That was really
Yes.
cool. Just really next level stuff. And then Rena. So they're heading towards her ship after they've had that whole chase, which I wish we had more time to discuss, but we don't. And then both Devon and Docky sense something is not right. And so Lawson contacts Rena and she's like, yeah, the ride's all ready to go. It's not really luxurious, but it'll get you to Catalor, which was the name of the planet where they had, he saved her life, she saved his. And
Yes.
as soon as she says that, Lawson's like, oh, the reaction on his face was priceless. It's like you can see the shock and the worry on it. And he's like, she's been compromised. And so, we ultimately find out they cut the hatch through the ceiling of the lift because they can't stop it. And then Rena turns around and blasts the engines. I couldn't tell, but it looks like as that ship's blowing up, she rolls out of the way to the side, so she may be
Mhm.
alive. But it was hard to say.
There is, because I watched that myself too, because I thought
Mhm.
to myself, "Is she really gonna be gone?" It would
Mhm.
really upset me, quite honestly. So I stopped it and watched it in really slow motion, and there is someone that looks like they're ducking as you're looking at the screen, like, off to the left,
Yeah,
where
that's what I'm
there's
talking
these,
about.
like,
Right.
yeah, 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 where these, like, storage containers or something are, but it looks like she ducks in front of them instead of behind them, so it's kinda really hard to tell exactly what may have happened. But I'm hoping that we haven't seen the last of Rheena because
Yeah.
she's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, there we are. That got us through these 2 episodes. The last thing that happens is that they go to hide in Nicodemus's office, and Ludi's bragging about how he killed Nicodemus. But the episode ends with Ludi getting a call from Crimson Dawn, and they say that Dryden Voss requests an audience with Maul. So, yeah, that's pretty exciting. I can't wait to see how
Yeah,
that
it is.
pans out over these last 2 episodes. But
So incredible. Yeah, there's so much to digest in these episodes. And I'm really hoping, you think they'll have a little cameo from Paul Bettany? You think that'll happen?
we'll see. We'll see.
Yeah, that would be
It's
fantastic.
or Kira. I mean,
Oh gosh.
well, I guess it'd probably be too early for Kira. This is 1 year after Order 66, so she's not old enough for that yet.
Oh,
But
that's true. Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah. You're right.
so yeah,
Time-wise line or timeline-wise, goodness, you can tell we've been talking about this for quite a while. But
yeah,
speaking of Kira, just really quickly, when we were talking about the fact that we don't have enough time to really focus on this chase scene, this did give me Solo Star Wars story vibes. When
mhm,
Kira and Han were in their chase scene,
yeah,
it just felt like that. And the music, it was the same music that when uh Devon, almost called her Riley again, when Devon stole the speeder and those dudes were listening to that music, and it was just kind of like this punk music. Same vibe as what we get from Sabine in Ahsoka, right? So
yeah,
I just love these little, kind of diversions from the norm in terms of our typical Star Wars music. Not that I don't love it, but I just think that's pretty awesome.
yeah. You keep trying to call Devin Riley, and I
Yeah.
keep trying to call Devin Dawson. So we
So there
all
you
got our
go.
hang up right. But yeah, I love that those aliens that were in the garage when she went to look at the speeder, they were all voiced by D. Bradley Baker. Apparently, he just went into a booth
Oh,
and
really? Oh, that's
grunted at
fantastic.
himself
So
until they
he's
had enough.
he's basically like the clone of the alien dudes there, like just like the clones.
Yeah, yeah. All
That's
right.
awesome.
Well, we could easily talk about this for another 30 minutes, but we really are running out of time. So we're going to have to wrap this up, and we'll probably have a lot to say next week when we get around
Oh,
to
I'm
discussing the
sure we
final 2
will.
episodes. So,
I have one question for you though, Dennis,
okay.
before we wrap this up, because this has been bothering me. There was something that Lawson said when, see,
Oh,
I
you
almost
just did
called him
it.
Dawson. When Lawson said to Daki, he said, "I worked with a Jedi a long time ago."
No, I don't
That
know who.
piqued my interest. And I'm like,
Yeah.
okay, who could that be?
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. That would be, I don't know if it's in the comic, if there's any suggestion about that,
Oh, okay.
or if it's, something that we'll get a story out of later. But for the moment,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that definitely piqued my interest. So I had to bring it up. I couldn't let it
Yeah.
go without it.
Right. Okay. Well, then, like I said, we could talk about this for a whole lot longer, but we have other episodes that we need to get, or episodes of the podcast that is we need to get to. So we're going to end it here. Say thank you all for joining us for this episode of Podcast Stardust and this discussion of Maul Shadow Lord. We hope you've enjoyed it, and make sure you join us next week as we discuss the 2 um, episode finale that's coming out on Star Wars Day. I can't wait for that. And one of the surest ways you can make sure that you don't miss those episodes is by subscribing to the podcast if you haven't done so already. We're available on pretty much all of the podcatchers that are out there. We'd appreciate your ratings and reviews on those platforms that do allow such things. And then we'd invite you to go over to retrozap.com where you can find the rest of the back catalog, all previous 1,027 episodes of the show, as well as the other shows that are on the network. I know that Enjoy Stuff is going to have a fun Star Wars episode on Monday. I got to record a bit
Nice.
for that. So make sure you check that out. Jay, you want to remind everybody about what our social media contacts are?
Absolutely. So we are very easily found on Facebook and Instagram at Podcast Stardust. And you can always check out all of our Pinterest boards for some really fun ideas for everything Star Wars, especially with Star Wars Day coming up just in a few days. And then we also have our 2 YouTube outlets. So we have the traditional YouTube as well as YouTube Music. So those are just 2 more ways that you can listen to Podcast Stardust in addition to all of our other streaming platforms. So please like, subscribe, and share those out with your friends. And if you'd like to email us about this episode, your thoughts, any other episode, or anything that we've done, or any suggestions that you might have or questions that you might have for us, you can do that at our email, which is podcaststardust@gmail.com. And then if you are in need of some Podcast Stardust swag, a little refresh on the wardrobe, we have 7 different show logo designs to pick from, and you can head over to our TeePublic store. The link to that is in our show notes, and you can pick out any fun things that you like.
All right. What do you got going on in cosplay?
All right. Well, this weekend, actually, I am gearing up to appear as Ahsoka at a pre-May the 4th type of benefit, I guess you could say, for local art and artisans in a local town adjacent to where I live here. And so check out my Instagram for that, and definitely for the recaps on that here coming up as well. And so with Star Wars Day just coming up here in a couple of days, there's going to be all kinds of fun things. So I will be Ahsoka that day, as I said, but lots of other things going on as well as my Inquisitor, the 4th sister. So since we're talking about Inquisitors, you can check that one out there as well.
All right, so make sure you check it out on J Snips Cosplay on Instagram. Okay. Upcoming on the show on Monday, we will be getting into the news and a little bit of May the 4th discussion, so that's going to be fun. And then on a Wednesday, it's the next entry in our Darth Bane book club, so make sure you come back for that. It's been very well received, and we've enjoyed all your all's feedback on that. So, with that having been said, thanks for listening to episode 1028 of Podcast Stardust, everyone. Have a great weekend, and until next time, may the Force be with you.